Okay, so before we get into the communication about an MCI, I think it's important to talk about what an MCI is briefly, in case you don't know what that is, because later we're going to be talking about communication and what works and what doesn't work during an MCI. So essentially, an MCI is any incident that overwhelms the local resources that are responding to it. So an example of this would be a car crash. So if you're on an ambulance and you have an engine responding with you, that's 2 units, and you respond to 2 car MVA, 1 patient. That's not really an MCI because you can control the scene, can control the situation. But if there's 2 units responding to a car accident and you arrive on scene and there's, let's say, 6 cars and 8 patients, multiple who are critically injured, then that's a lot more than you can handle right there. And so you need a lot of resources, you need communication, and you need some sort of a command to direct all this stuff. So that's where the incident command system comes into play.
So the incident command system's main goal is to streamline and coordinate communication and rescue efforts by personnel. Any MCI that is activated, as you could say, is going to receive police, fire, and EMS. And as well as those, you're going to receive commanders from police, fire, and EMS. Typically battalion chiefs, as you would say. So once they get on scene, the incident command system is going to set up a command center. And this command center is going to be located typically at the front of building, park area, wherever, and they need to let everybody know where that command center is, because that's where all the battalion chiefs are going to be. So once they get on scene, everybody has different tasks. EMS, their only task is going to be patient care, so they're doing nothing else but talking to the patients, finding out their symptoms, getting the transport ready, patients only. Police, they're going to be there for traffic, they're going to be there for crowd control, they're going to be there for just general public safety as well. Unless it's an active shooter, then police are kind of going to be at the forefront of efforts instead of fire and EMS. So fire, once they get on the scene, they're going to be taking control of traffic partially, and their main thing is going to be extricating any patients and triaging the patients. And triage is a really specific task that firefighters are taught that is really quick way to identify life-threatening injuries in patients, and it really pretty much tags patients and allows the EMS to come and look at them and figure out who needs to be sent to the hospital first. To talk a bit more about triage is Cameron over here.
So when I start triage, I want to quickly identify victims who have life-threatening injuries and those who have the best chance of surviving. I'll be marking them with 4 of the acuity categories. Those are green, yellow, black, or red. Green means minor, yellow is delayed, black is expectant or deceased, and red is immediate. When I'm making my assessment, I want to be doing this under 30 seconds or less, so it can be rapid because there are going to be critical patients. You should always remember the algorithm RPM. This will help you with giving your patient a certain tag. So we're going to be looking at their respirations. If they're not breathing and you've opened their airway, you're going to give them a black tag because they're deceased. If you reposition their airway and they are breathing, or they're breathing more than 30 times a minute, you're going to give them a red tag. If they are breathing, they're breathing less than 30 times a minute, you're then going to go and check their perfusion. So if they have any gross bleeding and they're breathing less than 30 times a minute, you want to treat that. So you will apply pressure, and you can use bystanders to come over, and they can also help you apply pressure to any type of gross bleeding. But if they have a radial pulse, you'll go down and check their mental status. If they have a cap refill, under 2 seconds. You'll also check their mental status, but if they don't have a radio pulse and their cap refills over 2 seconds, then you're going to give them a red tag. So when you're checking their mental status, if they can't answer simple questions, you're going to give them a red tag. But if they are breathing effective, they have a strong pulse, they answer all the questions, they're just unable to move without assistance, then you're going to get them a yellow tag.
So now that we've talked about the structure of an MCI and the tasks that need to be done, let's talk about the hardest part of a mass casualty incident, which is actually the communication. So any communication needs to be sent from the lowest level of operations all the way up to the command post, which is, like I said, outside at the front of the building, away from where the incident is actually taking place. Usually you can't just walk over and talk to it. Sometimes, like an active shooter, it could be a quarter mile away or more.
So that's when we get to radios right here. So radios, everybody's got one. Everybody's panicked, high stakes scenario, and everybody's trying to talk at the same time. So radios are really what makes or breaks an MCI as far as communication. So I think the hardest part about radios is slowing down, keeping it short. There could be 50 people on scene or more. Everybody's got a radio. Don't be wasting time on the air. Let people talk, let people get out what they need to say. From what I personally witnessed and read, I think the most difficult part about radios is the fact that police, fire, and EMS don't typically have a single channel designated. A lot of times they're too busy dealing with other situations than getting out saying this is going to be our designated channel for this. Not everybody might hear that. There's just so much stuff going on that it's sometimes hard to get everybody on that same page, and that's what really makes it difficult as far as radio communication and getting that information that they've got 30 patients inside the building instead of 6. Getting that information out that needs to be out fast and can't wait.
So to get kind of a second view on MCIs, ICS, and communication during an MCI, we were fortunate enough to get an interview with a captain from the Portland Police Bureau, and let's see what he has to say.
All right, thanks for sitting down with me today and letting me do this interview. Can you just state your name and your job?
Yep, my name is Jeremy Price, and I'm a captain with the Portland Police Bureau.
So today I'm just going to be asking you a few questions on mass casualty incidents and triage. So the first question I'm going to ask you is, what does an MCI or mass casualty incident mean to you?
So mass casualties in law enforcement would be something similar to like an active shooter or any kind of attack or something like that, where you're going to have basically a higher level of casualties than the local resources allow, whether that's fire, EMS, or the medical services, hospitals. In Portland, where I work, we have 2 major trauma centers, as well as other smaller hospitals that can deal with smaller events. So I believe they would be able to handle more casualties, but smaller towns like Boring or Oregon City, 5 casualties could overwhelm them.
Mm-hmm. So during a mass casualty incident, what would you want to be accomplished during triage?
When we respond to a mass casualty, obviously you have to identify like your hot, cold, and warm zones for law enforcement initially, so that we can secure a location for like fire and EMS to come in. We don't do a lot with the triage. We do the collection of mass casualties within a target area or something like that. But working with our partners in fire department, They look at triaging for your critical injuries, people who are not as severely injured, and then people who are basically ambulatory or can self-treat.
Yeah, so that's the system, the green, yellow, red system. That's the colors of the tags that the EMS people will use for the triage.
Right.
So you're familiar with the incident command system, I'm assuming?
Yes.
So how is the incident command system structured on an MCI?
On mass casualty incidents, typically we will pair with fire department, and generally the way the system is set up, it's supposed to be fundamental for any agency to be able to come in and run a mass casualty incident. So you could have a fire commander or a battalion chief in charge of the entire event as the incident commander, and then he would designate like a operations branch chief or a logistics branch chief, and those people would then have basically people under them that would actually, it limits the span of control and allows for information flow, back and forth from those chiefs rather than all 6 people that may be underneath the logistics or the operations branch to report simply to one person who then carries that information up to the commander. But typically what we'll do is we'll work side by side just for, because we may have an active incident which is still maybe warm for firefighters or EMS personnel who aren't going to go into a scene, and we need that separation of command so that we can carry out our portion.
So how would you assess and continue to reassess the number of patients you have on like a mass casualty incident?
On major ones that we've done samples as far as active shooters in a school, and we've done active shooters in like a theater, and basically you try to assess how many you would be able to fit within a football field and determine if that's how many people that you have that need to be triaged. You basically round to the highest number that you think you have. And that number can change at any time because you have those people who can self-treat, which would reduce your number of people that you're going to need to, provide, medical treatment to initially, and then you would assign somebody to manage that casualty collection point where the triage is happening, and they can track how many are going out and then how many are coming in.
And so when you're doing all these things, I'm sure you come across like language barriers and like that. How do you deal with those?
Language barriers, most officers, I'm assuming firemen have notebooks or at least some form of paper, clipboard, things like that. We'll use a lot of times, just simple writing things down. Most people who may not be able to speak English can write in English. Obviously, we have officers who are also bilingual, so we would be able to, have somebody come in and speak Ukrainian or Cantonese or Mandarin or whatever we need. Now, typically, that's something that you would have to, hopefully those people are working during that day, or a lot of the court systems have translators on call that you can, call, and if there's like a major event, then you would be able to call on those folks.
So, how do radios help or complicate mass casualty incidents and like communicating with mutual aid departments?
So, our radio system that we have, typically the Fire Bureau has one of our tactical channels on their radio net. What we have seen in actual events, when we had the active shooter at the Clackamas Town Center, so many agencies from so many different places just overloaded the system and it crashed. A lot of people were communicating via text, or we had encrypted nets where we could switch to and communicate. But the primary net that most agencies would try to transfer to would just be so overwhelmed that eventually you get to the point where you are simply communicating face to face. And then, once the system once the incident starts to kind of stabilize,
We hope this video is interesting to you, and maybe you even learned something if you're looking for a career as a first responder.